Yay, I'm so excited you decided to come back on the Craving Consciousness podcast. Samantha Hunter, um, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
Yes, we have been friends, peers, coaches, all the things for a few years now. And I love following you because you're so intentional. And that is huge in the spiritual awakening world.
Thank you. Yes, that is definitely something I've woven in throughout the years in this entrepreneurial online space for sure.
How long have you been an entrepreneur?
Oh goodness. I think we are coming up on probably like 7 years now.
Awesome.
Yeah, in a whole myriad of capacities.
Yes. Yes. And this is what I love about you too, because watching you, from your stories and stuff is like watching you weave in and out of like different business models, different ways that feels good for you to run your business. And it's so freaking beautiful because from the outside, right? I'm watching, it's not clunky. It's not like, what is she doing now? It's more like, oh, wow, like what is she doing now? More of a fluid thing instead of, oh, she just changed her mind and she's doing something else. It's like, oh, she's going with the flow and she's intentionally making sure that it feels good in your gut before you actually start doing things with that.
I love that. Thank you. I really feel like as entrepreneurs, we're sort of the core of our businesses. And if you think about kind of the journey we take through life, you can mirror that in your business too. And I think really having that intentional time to process where you are going, where you want that business journey to take you, has been really amazing to sort of, like you say, follow that flow and make sure that it's all feeling aligned.
Yeah. Because when we're wanting to make big changes, and that's what she does, you guys, um, intentional transformation. It's important for us to really sit with that intent, right? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So for me, when it comes to transformation, and like you say, it's really that intention behind it. And so I find really tuning into your why is kind of like the first starting point for me. And whether that's in your business, in your life, in your wellness journey, just sort of anchoring into that why and setting that intention behind it, and then taking that time to really sink into that and tune into that and just sort of allow that to unfold in a way that feels really meaningful and in a way that feels that sense of alignment as you're moving through it. And I think so often when we think about transformation or we think about our journey, we have this really specific goal in mind, and we think like, I'm gonna just do this, and this, and I'll be there. I'll hit that goal. I'll be at the end of my transformation. We'll check it off the list. And I think in reality, it can look quite different than that, which I think most of us have experienced. But I think where we often get tripped up is in we kind of stick in a really steadfast way to the plan rather than having that steadfast um, being linked to the end result or that intention behind it and then flowing with the plan. And so one thing that I have found is sort of being really intentional with how I'm showing up, with what that goal is, but also being really resilient and recognizing that things will go very differently than maybe I have them mapped out in my mind. And really that's okay. And that will teach you so many skills along the way and lay that foundation so that eventually when you do hit that goal, you'll have gained so much along the way, and you'll have that sense of alignment. But so I think it's really tuning into that why, tuning into that resiliency. And if you're going to be sort of stubborn about something, make it those things rather than the actual process itself, which can vary so greatly depending on some things within our control and some things far beyond our control. Yeah, so I think that's sort of a big overarching theme for me. And then I think also sort of related to that is really tuning into that sense of being. So when I talk about, that process and thinking like we have to do it in all these steps and focusing on doing, that feels very different than focusing on that state of being and showing up as that version of yourself or as that sort of state of yourself, which sort of naturally lends itself to a more flexible and in some ways more meaningful process than thinking it has to be very mapped out along the way.
I love all that. When it comes to the why and how you're saying when you're doing the process and things don't necessarily go the way you map them out, this is where a huge chunk of people give up, right?
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking in my head different things, like say if you're an entrepreneur and say maybe you're going through a launch or something and you didn't get as many clients that came in and all the things that come into your mind because you set your intention, you're like, I'm launching this program or whatever it is. And I'm calling in, 3 students or 4 clients or whatever. And then you only get half of that. You could get in your head so big
Mhm.
versus also like say a personal goal of like a wellness journey of like say weight loss. I mean, I know how many and the millions of us are like listening to this have gone through this where you want to maybe you put a certain number and that number doesn't show up and oh my gosh, how much do you get in your head and then you quit. And so then you went on to say about being, and just a couple podcasts ago we were talking about being and doing, and who is that person that you are being and embodying that, and what does that person do, right? And so and what is that person's mindset like too? So if that launch didn't go as well or if that weight loss goal didn't come, you're still who is that person being during those ups and those downs.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think sometimes when we talk about that state of being, we think about sort of when things are flowing and they feel really nice and you're in that state and it feels really good. But you're so right. It's in those hard moments too. It's in those moments of grit where you really need to tune into that state of being too. And how does that version of yourself show up in those moments? Does that version of yourself get on the roller coaster and ride all those ups and downs in really extreme ways, or are you just sort of recognizing that this is the ebb and flow of life and showing up from that state? And I love how you connect that into the action too, because of course we still need to take action, but rooting that in that sense of being or that version of yourself that you really truly want to show up as will bring that level of intention and that action behind it. And I think that's so key.
Yeah. um so another thing that I guess I would like to ask you, and that has come up for me, that I feel like I found a lot of success in some of my transformation recently, is I didn't look at I didn't really necessarily look at this end goal per se, like a number or like I didn't put a label, I guess, on the goal. But it was more of what am I going to do today, or to who am I going to be just today? Just today. Just for today, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna walk, right? Or just for today, I'm gonna get up and make a story or a reel or something, Um,
Yeah.
because our human minds and our ego gets really wrapped up if we have like I think this long, like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be this long of a journey. And so we get overwhelmed and it's like, okay, I'm just giving up, How do you feel about that? Like that time, or how do you help your clients, overcome that like overwhelm of this long-term goal?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I totally agree with you. I think sometimes especially if it's a big goal, we can get so caught up in how long it's going to take and that feels very daunting. But I completely agree. If you focus in on what can I do today, and really focus in on the things that will move the needle one day at a time, one decision at a time, sometimes 1 minute at a time, depending on, what your day is looking like. I think there's a lot of power in that, and in being intentional in that moment and being present in the moment. And I think too, sometimes, so if I bring sort of like an entrepreneur, a business sort of reference to it, sometimes we think of that end result, and like you say, we put a number on it, or we put some kind of figure on it, and what that means, and we forget, if you think about, like, that's more of an output. But if we think about an actual outcome and what that feels like, and what that actually looks and feels like for us, rather than a specific number, because really when we're working towards these goals, we think it's about a number. It's really not about the number. It's about what we think that will give us, whether that's, an income goal, a wellness related number, a weight loss goal. It's really more about what that will produce and how that will make us feel. So I think for those of us who are maybe more kind of achievement oriented, and we're very used to planting these concepts around metrics, kind of taking a step back and thinking about it as more of an outcome, and grounding into the long term in that way, into the vision around it, rather than sort of the metrics and the daunting pieces, can be really helpful. And then, like you said, coming back to what can I do today? How can I focus on this moment in time, and what I'm doing and how I'm showing up in this moment in time? And then integrating that version of yourself that is rooted in that vision, that maybe is in the longer term, but rooting that version of yourself into this present moment and making decisions from that version of yourself.
I think that's absolutely freaking beautiful. It's what we think that outcome will give us, or what we think that goal will give us. And that we weave that right into the law of attraction, because they say the only reason we desire something is because we think it's going to make us feel better, or we think it's going to make us happier. We think it's going to take us to a destination that we're not currently at. But if we could be intentional in that moment, and you could sit at the end of that goal and you could sit in it in meditation, right? Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about that all the time.
Mhm.
Sitting in the energy of already achieving that goal. And what does it feel? And you could feel that feeling right now. You could feel that feeling right now and hold on to
Absolutely.
it, right? And when we do that, it, tickles the fibers of the quantum physics world and infinite intelligence. So it's so beautiful to be able to, speak to people like you, where you're on the front end and the third dimension, helping people intentionally make these big changes. And then on the flip side, see the scientific side. Me, I get so nerdy about it, and
I
be able to
love it.
see, like, scientifically, this is how you're being supported when you're doing this intentional transformation.
Absolutely. It's
Love
so
it.
fast.
So you were talking before we started recording about your method. Like, what is your signature method that you were sharing?
Yeah, so really for any goal, I call it like the 4C method. And so the first thing is really getting that clarity, which is a lot of what we've been talking about, is why do you actually have this goal? What is this goal? What does it mean to you? And the key, which you just touched on so beautifully, is how does it feel to you? And like really tuning into that vision that you have for yourself. Um, and then once you have sort of a clear picture of what that looks and feels like, then the second step is to essentially collaborate with that future version of yourself, and start to integrate that state of being, or that version of yourself, into your current everyday practices. So you're taking that really empowered version of yourself, who has already done all of these things that have taken you down that path, built that vision, and then implementing that into your current day to day, and making those decisions from that really empowered state of mind. And then we have to clear the path. So we know that we come into this life, and we have lots of experiences along the way that that sort of shape our belief system, that shape sort of our subconscious. And so for me, it's kind of clearing that path between where you are right now and where you really want to be, and making it as simple and as easy as possible on yourself, so that recognizing, like we said, there are things beyond your control that will come up, that will surprise you, that will look totally different than what you expected. But what we can control is your response to those things, is your resilience, your mindset, your subconscious. And so really clearing the path so that when these things happen, we're not working or operating from those old patterns. We're actually creating a new way of being. So we clear the path, and then we have our kind of continuous check-in, our continuous sustainability model, really, and really making sure that as you're moving through that process, whatever it might be, that you're revisiting. And like I said in the beginning, like being really flexible with that approach, so we can be really steadfast in the belief in ourselves and in that sort of big vision that we have for ourselves, but flexible in our approach and change things up as we need to along the way. So that's something I will say, because we talked about, I'm very multi-passionate. So I've had businesses in multiple areas. I've had goals for myself in multiple areas. And that is sort of the method that I use for everything from business goals to career to wellness goals. It's really sort of the foundation to all of the work they do with my clients as well.
I love all of that. So can you name all 4 of them again?
Yeah, so we have, the first is clarity, and then we have collaborating with your future self, clearing the path, and then checking in.
I love it. I love it. What is your Instagram? I feel like everybody needs to go follow your Instagram and see how intentional she is, and how I mean, because tell them what your Instagram is first.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So it's Samantha M. Hunter _.
Okay, Samantha M. Hunter _. Because let me tell
Mhm.
you guys, this lady makes the best cup of coffee you will ever look at on her Insta stories. And here I am just putting some tea in here, flinging the tea bag out, but when she's so intentional, it's like it's got the cute little cup, and it's just so flowy. I mean, the energy, you guys will feel her energy as soon as you see her stories. But that's what I mean about, being intentional, even with that cup of coffee, because how does that cup of coffee make you feel when you got it in your fancy little cup and you're making it all frothy with your little frothier thing, you know?
Absolutely. It's actually so funny that you touch on the coffee, because it sounds so simple, but you're so right that just adding in that element of flow and intention behind something so small has been so huge for me. And so I do share that. And every once in a while, I think, do people need to see my daily cup of coffee, my daily cup of tea? But I have had so many comments on the coffee and the tea. And not to say, a cup of tea is life-changing, but sometimes it is when you use it as a very simple method of grounding, of bringing that intention and that sense of flow and that state of being. And so for me, all of the coffee and tea posts actually originated from me recognizing that, as a new mom, this started back when I was a new mom. And as someone who had internalized a lot of society pressures and ideals, I didn't feel like I had this really strong connection to myself. And so I knew that I loved slowing down and having a good cup of coffee or a good tea. And then it kind of just developed into this morning ritual of really grounding into what felt like the truest version of myself, and then set me up for a day where I was able to better tune into that throughout the day. And so it's so hilarious that you mentioned the coffee, because it has been such a small but powerful practice.
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect example for all the listeners, is that's where it starts, you guys.
Yeah.
And we're talking a lot of times, at least I think, when we're doing these major changes, as women, right? I think a lot of times it's really coming back into our womanness. It's really coming back into our divine feminine. It's really coming back and treating that inner child and loving ourselves, because we've been taught like go, go, go. And I mean, even my grandma actually worked, but back in that, decade or whatever, the women didn't work, but then we're taught like work, work, work. And now what we're having children, you have children, a career and a business. So being able to say, I love myself enough to have this cup of tea and to treat myself special, to make it special, is the freaking first step, if you ask me. There was one time I was broken, depressed. Like that's one of my stories, right, of coming out and being in the
Mm.
entrepreneurial world, years ago when I was in Michigan, and I was already developed psychic medium and all that, and I was broken, depressed, and I was in the shower, and I kid you not, spirit told me, they said, if you treated yourself like a princess, everything would change.
I love that. So
And
powerful.
at the time I was like, yeah, right. Well, I can't afford that nice soap, or I can't do this. Like I was pushing against the message I got from universe, spirit. But it is so true. So what? Start with just touching yourself on the shoulder, or having a cup of tea. I mean, it's even if you're like so down and out, you had to go to the food pantry, they'll give you a cup of tea, and like have this tea and start where you're at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Oh, how do you feel about that? Starting from where you're at.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. And I think sometimes, like we had talked about, goals can feel very daunting, and it feels like there's this big distance between where we are and that kind of ultimate vision that we have for ourselves. But you'd be amazed the way that these things snowball. And you take that one intentional action, that one act of self-care, that one act of self-compassion, and you just build off of it, and it gains momentum, and it just grows from there. And I think the more we create that feeling of comfort in treating ourselves that way, and that feeling of safety, and that feeling of self-compassion and self-love, it just starts to grow from there, and it starts to seep into all of the other areas of our life. So I totally agree. I think starting where you are, and having the self-compassion to recognize it will come naturally some days, and some days it will feel very awkward. Some days it will feel very outside of your comfort zone, and that's okay. Over time, it will snowball, it will build momentum, and it will start to feel so much more natural.
Yeah. Um, Something else that reminds me of is when we do start making even that small change and we have that repetitive, you start noticing outside of yourself other people that are doing that same thing, other people that have the end result that you're wanting, other people that are on their way to that same result you're at. So it's I call it kind of like shifting dimensions. It's shifting your awareness, because you
Yes.
didn't notice all that. And I joked with myself, well, right, like I'm always talking to spirit's always talking to me, when I first started like really, really walking last year. And I was like, what are these crazy fools up this early in the morning for, walking around? Oh, these guys are nuts. And then I was like, oh, what of them?
I'm here too.
Because I used to always say, you'll never catch me running unless somebody's chasing me, right? And so I still don't run, but you start you start coming to that frequency, coming to that vibration, and accepting this new behavior. And then when you do that, guess what happens? It opens your awareness even further. And you're like, well, what else is out here? What else? Oh, this is exciting. Maybe if I like lifted a weight, after this walk,
Mhm.
wow, what will happen then? Or, we could tie it into all these different goal things. But yeah, you start becoming aware of other people doing it and other routes to get there.
Absolutely. It just opens your mind to that sense of possibility, and you can start to dismantle some of the walls that you had built up, that you maybe had just sort of accepted as part of your identity that really actually were just things that you had sort of built along the way based off of all of the different programming and patterns and beliefs that you formed, and you can intentionally choose ones that serve you. And I think, like you say, building that awareness, and then what else is out there? Maybe I do like this other thing that I've never tried.
Yeah. And what else can I do that I would never ever consider doing, you know? Maybe I
Absolutely.
will run. Um, something just popped in my head, so I feel like it's important for us to bring. There was one time we were on a call and you said that you went out to your pool and that you were super calm and then something happened and it shook you. Do you remember telling me that story? And that you said to me, and then I realized that everything is already here and that I get to choose how I want to feel in this environment. I could feel startled by maybe a motorcycle drove by or something, or I could
Yes,
feel at such peace. Do you remember that? Or
I do remember that story. Yes. Yeah. So for those who don't know me, the water is like a very calming, grounding place for me. So we have a pool in our yard, and in the summers, I make it a habit. I go out there at night, I have a little swim, and it's just this really incredible, calming thing that I do. And on this particular night, um, things were quiet, things were going as they normally do. And then all of a sudden there was like a motorcycle or a truck or something really loud in the distance. And I find I'm very sensitive to noise. And so it startled me. And then as I'm swimming, everything else around me is exactly the same. But suddenly I'm aware of how dark it is. And suddenly I'm feeling really nervous and feeling like, oh, is this a good idea? Should I be out here? And moments before that, I was in that state of like super calm, really refreshed, feeling really in tune with myself. And so it was this really amazing lesson of the only thing that changed was one outside stimulus and how I responded to that. And it changed my entire perspective on the situation. And then what was really interesting is that once I had that awareness that that's what was going on, like my physical safety had not changed at all. There was nothing, I was not in danger. There was nothing around me that was putting me in any other physical state. It was my perception of what was going on that I hadn't noticed before. And as soon as I had that awareness, I was able to tap back into that state of calm that I was feeling before, because I realized it actually was me that had changed. It wasn't something around me that was impacting me. That motorcycle was nowhere near me. It was just loud. But as soon as I had that awareness that it was my own reaction, I was able to, like you said, to tune back in and to choose how I felt in that moment. And it was a really great lesson.
it is, and we can apply that to anything, right? I used to have anxiety about checking my mail or checking my bank account. All that trauma that comes back with all the personal growth that I've gone through, and I remember that that's what I have to heal. That the mail's still there, right? The
Yeah.
bank account's there. It just is, right? It just is. We don't have to have emotion over it, but if you do, then you get to sit there and you get to go, you know what? Maybe I want to feel freaking elated to check
Mhm.
my mail. And how can I hold that in my energy as I'm going to check my mail and then get used to it? And when we do that, again, we're tickling the fibers of the universe, and we're letting them know all of a sudden we're checking the mail and we're starting to get checks in the mail or love notes in the mail, or long-term friends that we haven't talked to in a long time, just things that elate us.
Mhm.
Whereas if we're constantly holding that other emotion during that activity, then we're going to get the results of what that emotion also has.
Absolutely. And I think it was Louise Hay also talked about something very similar, that she had this fear around paying bills and this feeling of like being stuck in this never-ending cycle of paying bills and not having enough, and that feeling of scarcity. And she decided that instead, when she opened her bills and paid her bills, she wanted to feel a sense of gratitude, and that it completely transformed, again, her perception of what bills were. And then, like you say, that leads to all of these other things that start to come into our consciousness, into our world, because that perception has changed.
All about our perception. I love how you're using the word perception, because it's true. It's just really how you're looking at it. It's just really how you're looking at it. You could be terrified of a rainbow, or you could like it, you know? Yeah. There's that little meme that I'm sure everybody's seen, is the bus. One person's looking out one window and he's all sad, and one person's looking out the other window and they're all excited. It's the same thing. It's their perception of their day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So freaking awesome. I love all this conversation. So, um, tell the audience, like, that's your signature program, the Soul Led Success.
That's the one.
Yep. And they can find you on your website where, darling?
So you can find me on, so Instagram is where I'm most active, but you can find me on my website at www.sammythelifestylist.com.
SammyTheLifestylist.com. And definitely you guys go follow her on Instagram, because you'll just love all, like, even how she intentionally makes her posts and everything. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Yay.